consciousness to me is the ultimate technology. It's the foundation of reality. And by accessing that, you can do literally anything. AI can become so advanced that it acts like it has all of those things, and maybe it'll act like it's having out-of-body experiences. Yeah. It's funny, he tells this story about this, he went to some non-physical place that was supposed to be like the done dimension or something like that, where all these people had thought they had escaped the wheel of karma and ended up in this place. And he went there and kind of the people were they ultimately all kind of realized that, oh, they're not done. There's no such thing as done. Like the fact that they thought they were done was the problem, you know.
Ultra minds, ultra minds, ultra minds, ultra JK, ultra. Ultra minds, ultra minds, ultra minds, ultra JK, ultra.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ultra Minds. Today, we have a very special guest. As you guys know, I was just at Monroe Institute and had an incredible experience. I've been getting a lot of technical questions and more questions around Monroe's other programs, their technology. So I'm honored to be here with Paul Citarella, who is the Executive Vice President and the Chief Technology Officer of Monroe Institute. He will be here today to answer some technical questions and talk a little bit about how the technology has evolved over the years from the original gateway. Paul, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's great to be here.
I'm so excited to ask you some things. So first, can you kind of give me a little background of how you ended up at Monroe and how you became the CTO?
Yeah, sure. So interesting story. Like a lot of our journeys to Monroe is guided by a lot of synchronicities. So that happens a lot around here. So my background is in technology. So I've always been in software engineering, starting in like big corporate IT, and then did a bunch of startups. So I've kind of always been into that. At the same time, I've always been kind of a seeker, even from an early age. So always kind of wrestling with those big questions of like, why are we here and that sort of thing. So, and for me, those two things were two totally different worlds for like, most of my life. I got busy with career and all that stuff and focused on that. At the same time, I think I first read Robert Monroe's books about 25 years ago, maybe a while ago, and was totally fascinated. So it's always been there. And I actually started kind of experimenting with the gateway, exercises, the home version. So I had done that, many, many years ago. Started having a lot of my own experiences. And so it's interesting that kind of through a series of interesting events, it kind of all led me here. The short story is I had all these experiences and was kind of, waking up to kind of this larger reality of who we are. And it changed my perspective on what was really important to me. And my wife and I were kind of going through this at the same time. So we ended up selling everything we owned. We moved onto a sailboat and we lived on it for 4 years, homeschooled our 2 girls, and we sailed mostly around the Bahamas. So that was kind of, the break between my previous kind of, professional focus. And then like, again, once I realized I was more than physical, everything changed. So we did that. And then when we were coming back to land, it was about 5 years ago. It's funny. My wife asked me like, what would be your ideal job? And I was like, Chief Technology Officer at Monroe. So I literally, that was like my dream job. And then through a series of just, again, coincidences and synchronicities, it actually happened. I was working on, during COVID, I was doing this COVID project that was like a crowd-funded kind of like fundraising thing for nonprofits. And, I knew Monroe was a nonprofit. So I figured, all right, I'll reach out to them and see if they want to be, on this platform. And then in talking with them, this was just after the pandemic had really kind of heated up and campus was closed. And they were trying to figure out how do we like take what we do in the residential retreats and actually do that online, using technology. And they didn't have, kind of anyone who was really technology focused. So, and I took this one call that I wasn't, it was, my wife was going to take the call. I ended up jumping on the call, and like, that was what led to me ultimately joining the team. So, came in, focused on technology to figure out like, again, how we use technology really to kind of further the mission. And then it just kind of grew from there. So yeah, it's been a great story. But
oh my God, that's beautiful.
Yeah. What's cool is now like, it's the first time that these two different aspects of my life have come together in one place, to be able to like, unite that has been incredibly rewarding. And most of us at Monroe are here, have some kind of story like that. We're all kind of experiencers. This has changed our lives in some way. And we're here to, be a part of it and give back.
That was one of the most beautiful things that I noticed while I was there is really like everybody that I interacted with that worked there was it wasn't just like a business, a job. It's like
Right.
so integrated with like people's purpose, with their mission, and even the way that they ended up coming up with the people to bring to the creator programs that they've done. The second one, which was the one I was a part of,
Yeah.
is even using these same techniques. And it's kind of like beautiful how the techniques and the philosophy that comes through when you go out of body, when you realize that you're more than your physical, is so integrated into, the business aspect of it. And I mean, that was something that I thought was really unique that I've even in other types of similar retreats, there usually is still kind of those like the business side is still the businessy people. And it
Right.
was like really beautiful to see that the people that you guys have all attracted to Monroe are very aligned in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because we have there definitely has been that attraction, and it tends to be people who both have the experience and those, kind of business skills, which obviously is important. So yeah, it's very cool.
So you said one of the things that you kind of brought to Monroe was really kind of bringing them to outside of the retreats and making it more accessible through the internet and app and things like that. So that is kind of one of the biggest questions that I've gotten is that not everybody feels they can make it to a week-long retreat or get off of
Right.
work. So what really is like, how do you compare the online experience for things like Gateway and some of your other programs versus going in person?
Yeah. It's interesting because when the pandemic first hit and campus was closed, I think there were a lot of questions at the time as to whether people, whether it would be effective, in an online format or in a virtual format. And I think what we learned from that experience was that it is. It's certainly different. I mean, there's no substitute for that on-campus experience. I mean, there's magic there. I mean, you've been there. Like, it's something about that campus and tens of thousands of people having those experiences like at that location. There's some kind of like imprint there. There's definitely a magic. But in a virtual setting or even online, self-guided, people are having the same kinds of experiences. It's different, of course, but making it accessible is really important to us. Like, this can't be something that only a few people get to experience. It has to get out to the world in a big way, for it to be impactful. So yeah, we're very much focused on that. We've got a lot more coming in terms of kind of self-guided online format. So look for news on that coming this year. But yes, we're definitely trying to make it more accessible, from a time perspective, from a cost perspective. So lots of work happening there.
And I know that there is kind of pop-up locations that you guys do around the world. Is there other physical locations that are in the works or going to be coming up?
Yeah, we're looking at that as well. So we have other retreat centers now that we're kind of looking at renting out, and we've got one in Chicago we did recently. We're really looking on the West Coast as well, just to make it easier for people that are out that way. So we've got one coming up in California, Arizona. So we are looking at other areas, and then of course we've got Europe. There's a lot happening there. So yeah, definitely.
That's awesome. Okay, so around Gateway, so obviously at the time that Gateway, was birthed into this world, HemiSync technology is still very groundbreaking for what it's
Right.
doing. It's still like incredible because, for what I talked about in some of my videos is how that was one of the legacy programs. So the recordings that we were using are Bob's original recordings. I know that you
Right.
guys have cleaned them up and made them sound clearer and better than maybe the ones that are accessible online are the ones that you guys are using. But it's still that same technology. It's still those same frequencies. So it's still groundbreaking. But how has Monroe's techniques, technology, and things evolved since then and kind of your other programs that are newer?
Yeah. Well, as you can imagine, over the years, so that original technology was sort of really put together, like in the 80s. I mean, Monroe's been around since the 70s, so binaural beats have been used for a long time, and we've certainly learned a lot over those years and those decades about like neuroscience, and the technology we have for creating audio and doing audio production has evolved, tremendously. So we've continued to focus on how do we use the best knowledge and technology that we have today to continue to evolve that sound technology. So as we do that work today, that's under the umbrella of Monroe Sound Science. So that's kind of like the new term that we use for all of this ongoing innovation that we do with the audio tech. And HemiSync still represents the original that we still use, in like Gateway that you've experienced. And so the tech has evolved in a couple of different ways. One is the techniques that we use for like the entrainment signals themselves. Like when you're listening to entrainment, there's a signal there that's causing your brainwaves to follow along with it. In the early days, that was done with binaural beats. And now we have a lot of other techniques that we can use to do that. And the latest generation is using 3D spatial audio. So we're basically, doing these entrainment signals in this simulated 3D space. And what's cool about that is entrainment is more effective when your kind of brain is paying attention to it. So like you can find binaural beats online on YouTube all over the place, and it's just like a raw binaural beat and you're just listening to that. It's the same forever. Your brain tends to kind of tune that out. So when we're working with our sound tech, we're looking for ways that will help your brain sort of latch on to that signal. There are independent studies that show that it is more effective when your brain is kind of focused on that entrainment. So what's cool about working in the 3D space is our brains are kind of hardwired to pay attention to signals that are moving around us. It's kind of an evolutionary, advantage, because you can imagine if there's like prey behind you, you want to pay attention to that, or if there's someone that needs to get your attention. So in the way that we're having these signals in 3D space and kind of moving in these specific patterns, it's cueing into that evolutionary bias for your brain to sort of focus on those signals, making it, again, ideally more effective. That's the idea. So yeah, there's a lot of work that we do on the signals themselves. And then the other element is the mixes. As you know, like what we do is mixes of different brain waves. And this is what's been discovered at Monroe over the decades is, we have focus levels, these specific states of awareness that Bob Monroe mapped out. And we use the audio tech in specific mixes to help people access those focus levels. So like, again, it's gonna be a different recipe of brain waves for these different states of awareness. And so we continue to evolve that as well. So obviously there are core focus levels, but then we have other things that we can do to target other states, like lucid dreaming, for example. Like there isn't a focus level that's like lucid dreaming. So we have other signal mixes that we can use to try to target that. So there's lots of activity going on there as well. And it happens through like our research programs and independent research that we do on campus. So lots of continued activity.
Wow. And so, for anybody listening who doesn't understand kind of the 3D thing, this is where when you're actually in this sound software, it's kind of like a 3D person and then moving the sound. So like before, maybe it would be like panning between sides, but now, like you're saying, you can actually move these signals around to keep the person engaged and in the state, which is so interesting because there's so many frequencies online and binaural beats and so many apps to do things. So it's interesting too, like what really is separating you guys in a lot of ways. And also because you have the mapping of it, you guys actually get to train on so many different thousands of people's brainwaves to really see what is working and what isn't. So another thing I wanted to ask you about was gamma. So as we know, this is kind of a newer discovery.
Exactly.
And there's so many things that were developed. It wasn't discovered at the time of the original Gateway experience. And then there's many other things, different styles of hypnosis, things like the Silva method. All these other types of techniques were really achieving theta, but many of those we're seeing were actually achieving gamma. It just had not been measured or discovered yet. So can you talk a little bit about gamma and how this has enhanced not only Monroe, but kind of all of our understanding around what is possible?
Definitely. Yeah. Gamma is interesting. As you point out, it wasn't really known at the time when the original Gateway stuff was created. And it's really because they just didn't have the tools to measure it. Like in the old days, they were using the paper EEGs with an actual needle physically that was moving, and it just can't move like faster than a certain rate. So when they started using computerized EEGs, they discovered the gamma brainwaves. And they're seen in advanced meditators. They tend to be associated with these kind of peak experiences or these aha moments where you're sort of like hyper focused. So like when they've done studies in like with Tibetan monks that are meditating for their whole lives, they see this sustained gamma activity, and that's unusual. Like many people will have bursts of gamma, kind of here and there, like you have some kind of like peak moment. But to see it sustained in these meditators is pretty unusual. So now we know a lot about gamma. We also see gamma spikes when people achieve lucidity in a lucid dream. So when you go from like a regular dream state to like that, again, that awakening awareness within the dream, you see this spike of 40 hertz gamma. So very interesting. So obviously we're using that information. So how do we use that to enhance the experience that we do at Monroe? And we use that a lot in anything that we're doing that's newer. What happens is it tends to bring like more of your waking awareness into that deep experience. So like when you get into a deep focus 10 or 12, people tend to have what we call a click out. I mean, it happens to some people where you something is going on, but you just kind of can't hang on to it. You can't bring it back with you. Gamma helps bring more of that waking awareness into that deep experience so that you have better recall and less of those sort of clicking out where you just kind of lose it and you don't remember what happened. So there's a lot of interesting work going on there, and people really notice the difference there. When you have that gamma piece there, it just brings that extra level to it.
And so it's interesting. There's been some things, different videos and TV shows and stuff who have put either mediums, channels, psychics under, the EEG. And basically they've seen that it's kind of similar to less brain activity, So what's interesting, one thing that I've kind of wondered, and, this is something, maybe a bit out there. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it, but, so we have these obviously brain waves and now we have gamma in there. I've always felt that there's like another scale that we can't measure that is like maybe in a lower range, that is like maybe much lower than what we can actually measure. And
right.
A friend of mine, she worked at the Amen Clinic, which, they do different types of brain activity. They do the SPECT scans. And she said that when they have people do TM, transcendental meditation, while in the SPECT scan, she said, it looks like the brain goes off, like as if the person is not there, as if it's like a dead brain, like part of it just leaves. But she knows that this person is having a transcendental experience.
Right.
So what's interesting is that it just shows no activity. And then we've seen this with other channelers or mediums that it's showing no activity. So I'm wondering, is there anything that you guys are coming across in your newer discoveries that is showing new types of brain waves that might be coming up or we might be getting closer to discovering?
Yeah, that's a great point. We actually see that as well, that when people are having these like, these true kind of like out of body experiences, the brainwaves tend to just all quiet across the board. So it's almost like we're getting people to a state where those things can happen. And then when that experience occurs, it's like you kind of drop away from that neural activity and then you're off having some other experience and then you sort of come back. So we're like setting the stage for that to happen through the entrainment. And then when it does, it's like, you see that activity really drops away. This is something that Joe McMoneagle actually talked about. He's, the world famous remote viewer. When at one point, they were doing some EEG studies on him. And they said, when he went into his process where he was preparing to do remote viewing, they said they saw his brainwaves basically go to zero. Like they've never seen anything like that before, where just completely the activity went away. And they said like they'd never seen anyone do something like that. So there's definitely something to that. We also study something called the default mode network. So it's a system within your brain of different areas of the brain that kind of work together. And it's thought that this default mode network is kind of like how you process reality. It's like your waking awareness, you could almost call it. And that specifically, that network kind of turns off when you're having these non-physical experiences. So it's fascinating. And there's a lot of new stuff being discovered all the time.
And one of the other things that I had the opportunity to just take a peek at while I was at Monroe was I did get to see some brain waves, and it was showing like basically kind of all entangled, like alpha, theta, they were kind of all entangled. And then at this one point, they all drop and then become into unison. And they were saying that this is what I was looking at was kind of an example of somebody either going out of body or having a transcendental experience. So can you talk a little bit about how like that kind of happens where then in our regular waking state, they're kind of all, it looked pretty like a little
Mm,
messy. And then
yeah.
it just became so cohesive. Like it was just everything was in alignment with each other and kind of the same type of distance apart.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I mean, anytime we're in waking awareness, our brain is always doing lots of different things. Like different areas of the brain are producing different brain waves. So it's like, it's this, kind of almost chaotic mix of everything going on. And the deeper we get into a meditative state, the more we're bringing that together. And then you're right, when you have that sort of magic moment, that kind of transcendental experience, it's a catalyst for them really kind of getting into that coherent state, a state of coherence. And that's something we look at a lot. So what you saw when you were on campus was the discovery program, where people come in and you get wired up with an EEG, and we're basically looking at your brainwaves in real time. And there's a neat little display you can see that shows, kind of what bands of activity is happening in your brain. So yes, we definitely do see that. It's interesting.
And I did in some of my previous videos talk a little bit about discovery because I got to speak to some people who were doing it and some of the
Yep.
monitors. And, you know, I was feeling that discovery is a really good place to start for people who maybe have more doubt,
Mm,
because I work with people doing hypnosis. And there's a big difference between kind of the people who are like, oh, I know that I can have these experiences, and they go very easily into their
mm,
hypnotic state and trust what's happening.
yeah.
Other people will go into that hypnotic state and kind of continuously pull themselves up to beta with those doubt thoughts, with things like that. So, can you talk a little bit about discovery and kind of like the benefits of maybe doing that instead of Gateway for some people?
Right. Yeah. And gateway is exactly that. It's good validation that something is happening in your brain. And there's a couple of ways that can be useful for someone who's coming in with those kind of doubts, like if they're new to this whole thing and not quite sure what to think. That can really be helpful because you're feeling something and you're seeing something like happen in your brain waves. So it is very validating in that, like, well, I experienced this really expanded state, and we can say, oh, look, here's what your brain waves were doing. So you weren't making that up. Something was actually occurring that was correlating to that experience. So for people who are new, that can certainly be helpful. The other people that tend to gravitate towards that is people that have done something like a gateway and had some really amazing experiences and then want to understand that better. So like, I've had some crazy out of body experience, like, wow, like what really happened there? And they want to dig a bit deeper. It's also great for that, where you can then go and say, okay, when I feel like this is what my brainwaves are doing. And you can see the correlation that again validates that you're feeling something and it's corresponding to something real that's happening in your brain. So that's helpful for those people in both cases. The other thing that's really useful too for a lot of people that are coming into this and aren't sort of fully into it, remote viewing can be great for that as well, because that's one of those things that's pretty easy to validate. And like people come into remote viewing, and a lot of times it's the people who have no expectations that have the most success. They're kind of like not sure what to think. They don't have any preconceived notions. They go in, they do something, and they get this amazing hit on a target. And it's like, wow, that's amazing. Something real is happening here. So it's not, it's obviously a different experience than Gateway. It's sort of focused on remote viewing, but once you know and you validated that like something is happening there, then you can really kind of let go of those doubts. And then that opens up the door to like a lot of deeper experiences. Because you're right, if you're in the experience and you're analyzing it and you're doubting it and you're wondering, is this happening? Am I doing it right? You're just engaging more beta brainwaves and just pulling you out of that state.
Right. And so, when I had learned the style of hypnosis that I do, it was a lot very like it was developed first in the 60s and then, a lot has happened in understanding brainwaves and things since then. So it kind of talks a lot about left and right brain, which
Mhm.
is, I think, a really good kind of easy way of explaining what's happening. But after my experience at Monroe, it really helped me to like use that knowledge of seeing people under hypnosis and guiding them through of like really what's happening in this like when they're consciously thinking and analyzing, they're pulling themselves up to beta,
Right.
and when they're more in their emotional state. So the type of hypnosis that I do, sometimes people will have a past life experience is what comes up.
Right.
Sometimes there's other experiences, but what I've noticed is when people are in like a past life, when they're taking in those details of like, oh, there's a house there's a person, it's sunny out. They slowly start to kind of go from that beta, bridge through alpha, and start to get into theta. And then when you start to see them really get immersed in the experiences, when the emotions start, that they're like, oh, this is my wife. Oh, this is my
Right.
kid.
Right.
And then they become so immersed. So can you talk a little bit about emotion as like an aspect of when it's connected to the brain waves in this way, and how these experiences, once emotion comes in, how they change and enhance your experience in these altered states?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, by the way, is that QAHHT? Is that the Dolores County? Yeah, that's
Yes.
really cool stuff. Yep. I had one of those sessions done a long time ago. Very
Oh,
interesting.
you did? Oh, cool.
So yeah, so emotion it tends to come out a lot. So as you think about what's happening in your brain, you're going into these really deep states of awareness. You're really kind of turning off a lot of that rational, kind of beta thinking, and you're getting into this deep sort of experience. You tend to not have those filters that normally block those emotions, right? Because you're kind of shutting down all that machinery in your brain, and you're just focusing on the experience. So it becomes can become a very emotional kind of experience for a lot of people, because you're just, again, you're getting rid of that gate that's normally there, where you can analyze your emotions and say, nope, I don't want to feel that right now. You just kind of have to go with it. And so yeah, people definitely unlock, can be anything. It could be like a past trauma, or any kind of experiences that might have been in the past. Those things tend to sort of come up. And many people find that very healing, because you're accessing and processing these emotions in a state where your sort of logical mind is not getting in the way. You're just experiencing them and processing them at a deeper level. And then you can kind of move through them. So a lot of people find Gateway to be very healing. Even if, you're coming because you want to have an out-of-body experience, you may not have that, but you may realize that you were holding on to some other past trauma, and you've released that at this very deep level. And it's a very emotional experience. And what's good is, when you're in an experience where there are trainers, they deal with this all the time. So they're really good at understanding these things and helping you work through it, and being there to guide you, as these things come up.
Right. And it's so interesting how once you kind of go from your thoughts to more the sensory experience, whereas like you're kind of going into it, you're kind of like say, for example, in Gateway, you use your energy conversion box. So
Right.
that's kind of giving you this more sensory experience, only more through the alpha. And then once you start to maybe get some insight or something, you start to become more into like the emotional experience. And then after the emotional, then that's kind of when that like gamma aha can kind of come in as you're passing through those types of brain waves. Now, kind of back to that like coherence of the brain waves that I had seen um, on that map of the EEG. Now, then we also kind of have this thing of like the Heart Coherence Institute, where they talk a lot about then the heart and brain coherence. So, how does that play into the type of things that you guys are doing? Do you guys also monitor heart rate? And do you see anything connected with the heart and the brain waves when people are going into these states?
Right. There's been a little bit of that kind of over the years at Monroe. Like, it's not something that we're actively looking at right now in terms of like brain heart rate variability. That's the key measure. But it's something that we're certainly interested in. I would guess, though, that as people are getting into these states, where we would find a lot more coherence, heart-mind coherence. And people who have done anecdotally, used Monroe, Monroe Sound Science or our sound tech, and then have also done the heart rate variability measures on their own, they do find that there is a correlation, because you're certainly getting into that, much more relaxed state. I mean, you're really just entering a very deep state of meditation. So that's definitely going to have an effect on that coherence. So maybe, yeah, possibly more in the future, but we're not doing much with that right now.
Right. Because, even though, my ideas and what I knew of Monroe and even going in is very mental, it's very like the mind, the altered states, scientific, but in the experience, it's heavily emotional,
Yeah.
very spiritual, very healing. So it's interesting that, so much of the focus, like a lot of people kind of, as I was talking about the experience, were kind of like, oh, I didn't realize that this is more similar to, I've done ayahuasca a bunch of
Right.
times,
Mhm.
and it was actually very similar to ayahuasca without all like, the purging and the hard stuff
Hmm.
and like the painful parts of it. So
Right.
it was like very similar. And I mean, obviously ayahuasca goes a bit deeper into the traumas because it really
Right.
kind of goes to that core wound stuff. But my experience at Monroe was very similar. And one of the people that I was driving back, they had just done Discovery, and that person was a scientist. And they wanted to just kind of see if it was real. And the things that he was saying that he got out of the Discovery program was the exact same insights that I got out of a 4-day ayahuasca
Wow.
ceremony.
Right.
So it was so interesting. And his happened more through these beautiful visuals and symbolic subconscious work. And for me, it was happening through like purging and laying on the floor and crying and shaking and with a bucket. So it was
Right.
very interesting. He came to those very same discoveries. So, what do you think is kind of the more profound things that you've come across that is more, away from the mind and more from like the soul, the emotion aspect of what happens in these programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, and so there's interesting, parallels between the ayahuasca or DMT or anything like that and what we do. I've done an ayahuasca ceremony as well, and they're, you're getting to this deep experience, but for me, they were very different. And I think the key thing that I would say, what appeals to me most about Monroe is that you're in control. So you're, like ayahuasca, you're going whether you like it or not. Wherever you go, you're going to be there for a while, and good luck with that. With Monroe, for me, you're in control. It's supportive rather than like taking a substance. So you've been there and experienced that. So that to me, I think is the big difference. And at any point, if you're always in control, you can take off the headphones, you can stop if something's happening. So that's a real key differentiator. And I think, many people just might be interested in these kinds of experiences, but don't want to go the substance route. That's not for everyone. You really have to have a lot of courage to kind of take that deep dive. But in terms of what people are experiencing, I think, it varies. I mean, people experience all kinds of different things, ranging from like just emotional healing, or the full out of body experience. That happens to a lot of people. I think the core of it is all of these experiences are about helping you understand that you're more than physical, and doing that through your own experience, right? So it's this is not a new idea. Religions have been saying this forever, that there's a soul, there's something more than physical. But there's a huge difference between believing that or taking it on faith and actually knowing it, like experiencing it in a way that is absolutely true. That, I think, across all the experience is kind of the magic moment. Like that's what it's all about. That's the shift, because when you come to understand that and you validated that through some experience of your own, it changes your perspective in a pretty fundamental way. It changes, almost like what it means to be a human. Like we have this narrative that we're just here as sort of some cosmic accident, and we're just our brains, and we're just meat machines, and we have this experience. That's all there is, and it's survival of the fittest. And so that's kind of where we are today as a society. But I know from my own experience, when I kind of really internalized, and it took some time. It takes some time to really get to grips with this, but you're more than physical. You're surviving physical death. Many people find they have multiple life experiences. So you come to this broader understanding of you. Like there's more to you than just who you are right now. There's a bigger you that's had multiple life experiences, and there's some purpose to all of it. And so you take this sort of bigger perspective of yourself over across like all of these lifetimes, and it changes your priorities for sure. I mean, it's not like, we don't come here to work really hard and acquire a bunch of stuff. Like that's not the point. There's this bigger evolutionary kind of story of you. So yeah, that's kind of the biggest piece for this, I think, is all of these experiences get people to that point. And our vision is enough people get to that point and have this experience and know that we're more than physical, and that then changes the world. Like everything we do now as a society is based on materialism, like that worldview. It informs everything we do. We have lots of division and conflict and war, and it's us versus everybody else, whoever your us is. When we realize we're more than physical, and most people come to realize we're all connected, there's a lot of like discussion around this like simulation hypothesis. I like to think of this reality as a virtual reality where consciousness is the fundamental reality. And this is sort of a construct within consciousness. And we're here to grow and evolve and learn as consciousness. And we're all connected to this root awareness. We're just different elements of that, different perspectives. When we adopt that as a worldview, we realize that we really need to be working through compassion and cooperation and not division and conflict. So that's, I think, the biggest picture. We talk about the global awakening of human consciousness. And that's kind of where it all leads, is like getting to that point. Bob Monroe wrote about in one of his books, this trip to the potential future, one potential future of humanity, where we had this awareness. We knew we were more than physical. We had a different understanding of the human experience. And it was a different kind of society. There wasn't borders and wars. We lived in harmony with each other and the environment. And, that's a reality that I think is good for all of us. So that's kind of the biggest picture.
Thank you for that. And there was so many things that came up in my experience and in the group that I was with. When you're doing these types of, advanced altered states and all of this, we kind of, I don't know what we thought like the revelations or experiences were going to be, but everybody was coming back into that debriefing room with the same things. Everybody was like, oh, kindness is all that matters. Like, very simple, but important things. And it's like, well, you know what? Love. We're all connected.
Yep.
Help people.
Yeah.
And it was like, to go so advanced in this technology and so advanced in these techniques and to be leading this way to then have these discoveries and epiphanies really come back to the core things that always are the same things coming up all the time.
Right.
Of course, people do have experiences where they're like, wow, I got a great business plan. Not to say that doesn't happen, but in my group, that was mostly, we were kind of all coming back with the same things of like, wow, be kind.
Yeah.
How amazing.
It's so simple, like as we've come full circle with all of our technological advancement to come back to the understanding of like who we really are, and it's about, we're all in this together. We need to be kind to each other. And it's such a simple idea, but so impactful. Like if that became the guiding principle of all of us, it'd be a whole different world.
Right. And I think Tom Campbell's a great example of that, because someone who just knows so much about everything, and really a lot of the stuff he comes back to is like, love each other.
It's about becoming love. Right. Yeah. And I really like his framework of trying to understand all this. He sort of says it's the ultimate goal of all of this, of reality, of consciousness, is to evolve towards a state of love, towards a state of love and compassion. And everything we do in our virtual reality here is designed for that purpose. And so like the further we can get towards that, that's the ultimate goal. And I think, Tom did a great job of kind of teasing apart how all of this works from a physicist's sort of, mindset. And he came to that conclusion. It's all about becoming love. That's how we evolve. That's how the whole system of consciousness and experience evolves towards that state. So, it's beautiful.
One of the things that he said in the past that I really appreciated was, he talked about like, if we're in the state of love, we worry about other people, we think about other people, and that's what comes forward. And when we're in a state of fear is when we're worrying about ourselves.
Yep.
And that's like, that's how we become like selfish, is the fear. And it was like, it's so simple. It really is. When you love, even if it is like conditional love, you're still worried about that other person or other people or other things. And when we're so worried about like ourselves, what about me? What if I get hurt? What if this? What if that? Then that's all like rooted back in fear. So it really just goes that like once we get to love, it becomes more of a collective experience.
Yeah. And, Bob Monroe talked about this too. In his view, he got this whole big rote, this kind of thought ball that he talks about in one of his books, where it was like the purpose of society. And he talked about like where we are today is we're here, we have this experience, we need to have a survival instinct, a drive. So we're born with this survival instinct. We have an ego. It's what allows us to operate in the physical reality. And in losing sight of the fact that we're more than physical, that survival drive has become everything to us. Like it's why we have greed. It's why we have, we fight with each other. It's all about that survival instinct. And when you're coming from a place of physical is all there is, then that's kind of makes sense. That's logical. Like if physical is the only thing there is, then yes, you should try to survive at all costs and make sure you have everything you need. And it's all about that. If it's either me or you, then it's got to be me. And when you realize you're more than physical, you can let that go. So yes, you need the survival instinct, right? We don't want to come here and just leave in 10 minutes, but you can recognize it for what it is. It's a coping mechanism for this reality. It's not the fundamental drive of who we are.
That's so beautiful. So with, you guys doing these, monitoring all of these different brain waves since the 70s, now we do know that there's collective shifts happening. Are there things that you guys are noticing in people coming, or kind of what's happening in people's brains? Are people getting to states quicker? Like things that are happening in this kind of consciousness shift that has been going on, I mean, very actively since the 70s. Are there things that you guys are kind of noticing in more collective patterns?
Yes. First thing I'd say, we are definitely noticing that, even 10 years ago, this whole topic of out of body was just nonsense. I mean, people would just say you're insane if you'd even mention that. That has changed drastically. We're seeing this now, like all over social media. There's tons of people talking about these experiences, and it's a combination of a lot of things. I think part of it is like this younger generation coming up and having questions about like meaning and why we're here and purpose. And there's, renewed interest in like psychedelics. That's driving a lot of this as well. So like so many different trends seem to be moving us in this direction of this being more accepted and becoming more of a mainstream notion. Even like from physics, you've got people talking about the simulation hypothesis and this model of physics that's based on this being a simulation. So like these ideas that, 1,000 years ago were just purely sort of esoteric, spirituality kind of ideas are making their way into mainstream science and culture. And that is definitely new. Like, over my own lifetime, I've seen a huge, huge difference. And that's so promising because like, we need this, like we need to come back to understanding, who we really are. So it's interesting. And then you layer in kind of what's happening with AI, and, questions about like, what does humanity do in the future if AI is doing everything for us? Well, we're still humans. I mean, maybe we go internally, maybe we go within and find out what our purpose is. And that experience changes. So it's going to be an interesting 10 to 20 years, I think. It may be that if we don't have to work anymore, we might all just decide, well, let's really dive into consciousness and understand who we are. It's going to be interesting.
And so on the topic of AI, virtual technology, neural implants that are starting to happen. Now, is there anything, obviously, maybe not yet, but do you see anything with Monroe in the future, maybe, in some way assisting with those things or helping, some of the discoveries that you guys have had integrating with some of these things?
Yeah, I don't know about like implants. That's something we haven't really thought much about. I have no idea. Yeah, I'm not sure where that's going to lead. In terms of AI, it's a useful tool for a lot of purposes. It's certainly great at like synthesizing information and, bringing something together into something cohesive. So like any business, I mean, we use AI for various purposes. I don't know, it's possible that AI might evolve to help us make the technology more effective. I mean, that's certainly a possibility. Or AI might help us have a better understanding of like large amounts of data in terms of brainwaves. There's certainly a lot we could do there. So all of these things are kind of on the radar, and we'll just kind of have to see where it goes. But I think at the end of the day, there's something sort of fundamental about the human experience and awareness and consciousness. And, some people think that consciousness is just, you get enough neurons together and enough complex processes and you have consciousness. And in that view, AI will become conscious one day. I tend to fall on the other side of that spectrum. I think the consciousness is really fundamental. And I don't know, like, I think we we're all part of the divine. Like we're one aspect of this enormous field of awareness. And I don't know if AI will ever be that. I tend to think there's something fundamentally different about who we are as humans that can't be replicated by AI. But who knows? We'll see. And then the challenge is, how do we know if it is different? Like AI can become so advanced that it acts like it has all of those things, and maybe it'll act like it's having out of body experiences and tell us all about them, but we wouldn't really know if it's really.
And in some way, could be AI ourselves inside of this simulation. We
Right.
could just be basically, that's just a different point of evolution of what we
Right.
are.
Yep.
Possibly, we could
Yeah.
have been the same thing.
Certainly possible. Yeah.
And so with like the neural implant thing, it kind of almost like, if Monroe was to eventually do something with that in the future, it would be very kind of similar to some of the things that are in Black Mirror, where like, they have this little thing, and if you guys have all of this information about brainwaves, you could just immediately put somebody into the altered state at the push of a button, and it could just instantly get them to out of body. And then that could be, I think I saw some studies years ago that they were talking about like teleportation, but that they were saying that it would be done through consciousness, and that's kind of the way that they're doing it. So I wonder if it's, with all of the information that you guys have about remote viewing and out of body, could that be potentially like, some type of teleportation through a virtual reality that is completely really there and completely really in that location, just like remote viewing is real?
Right. Well, I would say consciousness to me is the ultimate technology. It's like, it's the foundation of reality. And by accessing that, you can do literally anything. I think, if you're advanced enough, like you just do all of that stuff. So I think, it's interesting. I think if we get to that point, it's like anything is possible. And I think when we go now, like, let's say, I have an experience where I go out of body and I'm in some non-physical environment. I think I am doing that. I'm already doing that. I'm already teleporting myself into some other reality frame that isn't this one, but it is valid and real. And I've had experiences of my own that absolutely seem that way, like so real. And, every bit as real as physical reality, only I'm just aware that my body's in bed and I'm in some completely immersive, absolutely 100% real physical environment. And I think we're already there. Can we make it easier? Sure, possibly. I mean, that would be, that could be helpful.
So one of the other things kind of that comes up talking about Monroe is people kind of ask about like, well, is this okay to kind of have a shortcut to these altered states? So typically someone might need to be in stillness for so long to finally get themselves out of the body in that way. Whereas, the first day, a lot of people are already going out of body or having at least an astral projection in gateway. So like, what do you think about kind of this idea of it being, some people say it's a shortcut, some people might say it's just like assisting?
I, as you can imagine, I fall on the other side of that, which is I think it's assisting us. And I think that, our reality and our systems have evolved to get us to the point where we can make that technology to make it easier. The other thing that tends to happen is when you go into these experiences, you call it your higher self, there's some element of you that is sort of in the control room, kind of behind these experiences. Bob Monroe wrote about this a lot in his experiences, where other parts of himself would guide him in whatever he was doing in an out-of-body state. So in making this more easily available, we're giving people access to this, but there's still an element of control from your higher self. Like, you're generally not going to get put into experiences that you're not ready for. And so there's almost this sort of self-enforcing mechanism where you're going to get the right experience for you when you get into these states. That, I would say, in my experience, isn't always the case with something like a DMT or ayahuasca, where you're going to that state. You're not necessarily in control. I mean, yes, sure, it's all part of you. There's a higher self, but it seems to be more directly involved in kind of what we do, where you're getting interaction. You're talking with, what you think is a guide, and they're giving you some information. So I think it's important for our future for everyone to have these experiences. And we've got these sort of built-in guardrails, to some degree.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you think is coming up, like, kind of next? If you were to kind of say, what is one with Monroe, but also with kind of like the collective when it's coming to
Mm.
this higher form of enlightenment, whatever we want to call that, there's variations, but like, what do you think is kind of on the forefront if people kind of keep doing this type of healing work and inner work and altered state work?
Yeah. Well, for Monroe, I mean, what's coming up is making this more accessible. Like that's everything we're doing now is about making this more accessible to everyone, and that's the mission. It's getting it out there to as many people as possible and making it easy to access and afford and all that stuff. In terms of where we're going, the bigger picture. A lot of people talk about this shift. This is something I know, like Dolores Cannon talked about this in her material. This sort of concept of the two Earths, and there's like a new Earth being born. Like that theme tends to end up everywhere. Like I see it all over the place, and people doing drastically different work and coming at it from different angles, whether it's hypnosis or out of body exploration. It all seems to be coming to this understanding that we're entering a new era, and that's what I think is next. I think we're entering a new era where we finally have a better understanding of like what reality really is. I think we've had the blinders on for so long, and we focused solely on technological advancement, and that's good. I mean, it got us to where we are today, and we can have this conversation over the internet. I mean, it's amazing. We have a really cool technology, but we got to bring it back around to who we are and why we're here. Like the tools by themselves are great, but it's like, what's the bigger question? And I think when we get to that sort of next evolution, I think we'll finally have a good understanding of like purpose. I think a lot of people now just there's sort of this lack of like meaning and purpose in our lives. Like if it's just all an accident, like what does it matter? Like why bother? And I think when we get to an understanding of purpose, I think it will I mean, that will change where we go, in the future. So it all seems to be moving in this direction, and it seems to be happening, it's accelerating. It seems faster and faster. Like the last 2 years have advanced more than the previous like 5 years, and the pace keeps picking up. And it's like that snowball effect. The more people have these experiences and talk about them like you're doing, which is fantastic, the more people will know about it and have those experiences and talk about it. And we're definitely getting to this inflection point where enough people go down this route and understand that it's about becoming love and compassion, and it will just take off, and I think that's where we're heading.
That's beautiful. And like, I'm very immersed in that topic through the ayahuasca, through Monroe, through these very deeply healing experiences of kind of letting go of being more than physical, being more than just this person. One of the biggest things that, I've really kind of shifted in my own perspective around this kind of new earth concept, I think a lot of those initial channeled messages, hypnotic messages, and they, like you said, they come up in everything.
Mm-hmm.
I think that kind of initial download to the collective had to be more of a story because we've been so much in a story with like the Bible and our history and who we are. We're a story, each one of us.
Right.
But now that I've healed more, like all of these different aspects of the world has changed so quickly and things have become just like more part of the general knowledge. I really kind of my concept of like this new earth is very different now where I kind of feel like it's here. It's not, it was a kind of a little bit taken over by this rapture concept of kind of people are the good people
Oh,
are going to
right.
get buzzed out of here and
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
going to go live happily ever after, and
Right.
everybody who wasn't a good enough person has to suffer. And that concept is still, I think, part of this. That was part of the story because that's what still needed to be addressed within the collective,
Right.
not because that's actually what is happening. And what I
Right.
see more so is that it's like what you're talking about is this is being integrated into regular life.
Yeah.
It is not buzzing off into some other dimension reality and you're like, bye-bye, sorry, you still have to deal with the problems. And I was a good enough person that I don't have to. But now I'm like, oh, like it's here. It's happening every day. And I like to use the example of like, say you get a puppy or have a child. It happens so quickly in front of your eyes that you look at a photo from a year before, 2 years before, and you're like, oh my God, look how much they just grew in front of my eyes. And I didn't even realize it was happening. And that's like what I feel like when you said, like, look at 2 years ago, look at 5 years ago, look
Right.
at 10 years ago. It is here integrating into this real world.
Yep.
And it is not like we're going to escape everything that humanity is, and nobody is like above to get out of it or be spared of the experience, because this is the experience. So I've also come more to terms with like the idea of like we are exactly where we need to be. If
Right.
there's still war, in my opinion, then humanity still needs to learn things from war. If
Right.
there is still these things, then we're still there. And one of the things Tom Campbell has said, which another quote of his that I love, is he talked about like anybody who's like, I've reached enlightenment. This is my last life. I'm getting like buzzed off into another dimension. He's like,
Yeah.
is the first indicator that they have not reached enlightenment.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. He tells this story about this. He went to some non-physical place that was supposed to be like the done dimension or something like that, where all these people had thought they had escaped the wheel of karma and ended up in this place. And he went there and kind of the people were all, they ultimately all kind of realized that, oh, they're not done. There's no such thing as done. Like the fact that they thought they were done was the problem, you know? Yeah. It's really interesting.
Oh my God, that's so cool. I have to look into that, because that is very much, another one that things that came up at Monroe, kind of talking about the Lifeline program,
Mm,
how sometimes people can, because of their beliefs being so strong, either a belief of heaven or like say
yeah.
in Islam, they have a belief that people kind of stay suspended in some state until Judgment Day, or other people who have other beliefs, some of these conspiracy beliefs around like the white light soul trap, that you basically
Mm,
get recycled. And so people who have very strong beliefs can create these non-physical places where they all collectively, so that is very funny that you mentioned this
yeah.
done place, because
Yeah.
that is also
Exactly.
a collective astral place that has been created by a
Yep.
lot of strong collective beliefs.
Yeah. This whole topic is fascinating to me because it's like if you think of you leave the physical, you're now in like a thought responsive environment. Like the difference between thought and reality sort of evaporates. Like here you have this very strict reality and thought is something totally different. But there, what you think is your reality. So if enough people think a certain thing, you have a reality that conforms to that. And Bob Monroe talked about what he called the belief system territories. And it's like all of those people who are really sort of ingrained in their religious beliefs, and they created the non-physical version of the heaven or the destination or whatever it's supposed to be. And those people gravitate towards that when they leave the physical and ultimately realize, oh, okay, this is just another kind of belief system, and they can sort of get out of it. But it's like anything that we create in our awareness in that non-physical state almost sort of becomes material in that sense. William Buhlman is another one who talked about this a lot in his kind of experiences. Saw lots of these different environments where people created these these other realities. It's fascinating. Yeah.
Right. And kind of, I'm a believer of like, I do believe that, some version of a simulation, virtual reality is what's happening here, some type of
Yep.
holographic projection experience, AI potentially. And then there's these other simulations that are just outside of it,
Hmm.
that some of them might be the heaven places, some of them might be the done places for the people
Right.
who think they've enlightened out of it.
Hmm.
And
Right.
then we have these other places which are kind of talked about in, say, more like Journey of Souls type of experiences, or Brian
Yeah.
Weiss's work,
Oh yeah, the between live stuff. Yeah, fascinating.
which kind of assist us in this process of going back and deciding again. So I'm kind of a believer that then there's the way that our consciousness holds this reality in place. There's other beings who kind of stay on the other side, or parts of
Mhm.
ourselves who stay on the other side and hold those spaces to make the transition cleaner, easier, more organized. So it is interesting that kind of all these other things are still just other simulations, in my
Right.
opinion, at least.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And my own experiences sort of, yeah, have kind of validated that for me. So, yeah, very interesting.
Well, Paul, this was so beautiful. Let me just look if there's any other notes that I really wanted to ask you about. Oh, one question that has come up a lot, and I did answer it in the comments on my videos, but I would love to address it. A lot of people have asked about having hearing issues, being deaf in one ear, and kind of can they have some of these Monroe experience programs? Can they go and experience these things? And now I know that there's some adjustments that can happen or some special headphones. So can you talk a little bit about people who have that?
Yeah, for people who are hard of hearing in like one ear. So when we do this on campus, when you come, you have individual volume controls for like each side. So if like one ear is not as good, you can raise the volume on that side. So we try to account for that. If you're fully deaf in one ear, it is a bit more challenging because, the way that binaural beats work, and especially with our 3D spatial stuff, it's really relying on those auditory cues between two ears. That said, if you take that stuff and you collapse it down to mono, it doesn't go away. So if you take a binaural beat and you collapse it to mono, it becomes a monaural beat. It's still a beat. It still has an entrainment effect. It's a different kind of effect. Like the way that your brain processes a binaural beat is a little bit different than how you process a monaural beat, but they both have an entrainment effect. So it's different, but still effective. And we know this from people who have come who, are hard of hearing or deaf in one ear. They still have experiences. And especially when you're there on campus, I mean, just being in the group environment and having the shared group intention and like the magic of the campus, that definitely has an effect, regardless of anything else that's going on.
Beautiful. Okay, well, thank you so much for doing this. Oh, maybe one final fun question. What is your favorite focus level that you like to explore?
Oh, I like 27. Yeah, 27 for me is really cool. So I just did the X27 program earlier this year in February, and I realized that I had gone to a lot of those places already in my own experiences. So I tended to have like a lot of experiences where I'd be in this physical seeming reality that seemed to be like almost a university kind of setting where a lot of people seem to be, like kind of doing this between lives thing. And it just, kind of validated a lot of that for me. It's like, and it's like this whole, 27 opens the door to like this whole other reality of like where people go when they cross over. So like, it's just kind of limitless. There's a lot to do there. So yeah, that's cool.
And so the prerequisites to go to that program is you have to do Gateway. And do you have to do anything in between?
Yeah, Gateway and one more. So you could do Gateway and Guidelines or Gateway and Lifeline, and then you'll get to Exploration 27. And it's, I loved it.
Very cool. So I know what my path is, what
There
I'll
you
be
go.
doing
Yep.
next. And it's really interesting that you talked about these universities, classrooms, which is what comes up in Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls, Dolores Cannon's work, and so many other people who have done similar types of regressions, that they all come to these collective places. And oftentimes even people go to them regularly in dreams, wondering why they're having this reoccurring dream.
Right.
And a lot of times it's these actual kind of in between life schools and places.
Yeah. It's amazing. And it's funny because when I've been in those places and when I start kind of interacting with people, it seems like somehow they realize that I'm not asleep or I'm not dreaming. And there seems to be this kind of big commotion. Everyone gets excited. So,
wow.
I don't know.
Oh
It's
my
just,
God.
it's bizarre stuff, but it's interesting.
So cool. Thank you so much for doing this. And thank you for everything that you guys do at Monroe and like making this more accessible to people and, being so open to like have a conversation that gets a little weird, a little fun.
That's our
so I
favorite
really
kind.
appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, great. And thank you for doing what you're doing and helping get the word out and just sharing your experiences is it's incredible. I mean, you're part of the shift. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to Ultraminds with JK Ultra, where every Thursday we come out with a new interviewing some of the greatest minds in spirituality, consciousness, aliens, conspiracies, astrology, and so much more. And make sure you check out my Tuesday Night Live every Tuesday night, where I do a live stream and we do a Q&A and we go a deep dive into topics like the simulation theory, shadow work, spiritual bypassing, spiritual gurus turned cult leaders, aliens, my own experiences, and so much more. So make sure you subscribe, put on notifications, and if you would like to support my work, you can also become a subscriber to my Substack, which is $11 a month at jennifercarmody.substack.com. And once a month for our paid subscribers, we do a live event where we do a group hypnosis, a group meditation, or a group manifestation exercise. And thank you so much. Make sure that you subscribe, comment, do all the things, all the YouTube stuff.